Every person wants to be seen, heard, valued, and included. Let's be honest, some people don't get that chance. There are some communities that have been waiting far too long for that opportunity. Now imagine you invited me to your home for dinner. I arrive in your home, come inside, and instead of dinner, I begin rearranging your furniture. Now imagine waking up in a neighborhood where the nearest grocery store is miles away, where the bus route was cut years ago, where the school down the street hadn't seen a major investment in decades. This is the paradox of underserved communities. I want to talk with you today a little bit about how we've arrived at looking at underserved communities. These communities have been studied, surveyed, talked about, but rarely spoken with. Now imagine the brilliance that still rises in those communities. But here's what's happening. Outsiders are arriving with their prepackaged solutions, clipboards in hands, and the quiet assumption that they already know what's best. But here's the truth. You cannot create lasting change and impact in a community you have not taken the time to truly know. And you cannot earn trust from people that you only visit when you need data. This is why community-based participatory research, or CBPR, is so powerful. CBPR flips the script. It says the community is not the subject of the work. The community is the work. The community is the expert. The community is the co-author of every idea, every decision, and every solution. Today, we're going to talk about how do we use CBPR in our communities? Because understand, CBPR is not just a method, it's a mindset, a posture, a promise that every community, no matter its zip code, no matter its history, deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and included. Now, when we look at community-based participatory research, it's a model. It's a collaborative model that brings together researchers, community members, and organizations. But the goal of bringing those partners together is to strategize on effective strategies on how to move these communities forward. So we're going to look at a couple of areas today. We're going to talk about the engagement process using CBPR. We're going to talk about programming and implementation using CBR, and then we're going to talk about effectiveness of moving forward with those strategies. So when we talk about how do we engage our underserved communities, the first thing that we have to do is we have to build trust. And remember, trust is not built by showing up one time. Trust is built by showing up again and again and again. How do we start this trust process? The first thing we want to do is have conversations with these community members. One thing I love about community-based participatory research is it honors the history and it reminds outsiders that you are not the savior of these communities. Your job is to listen. The community know what they need. Our job is to provide the space for that knowledge to surface through. So when we're engaging these communities, we want to make the settings very comfortable for these communities. This is why partnerships are valuable. We need to engage churches and community centers to host these conversations. And these conversations have to be non-negotiable. When community members come to these meetings and they say, why build sidewalks if I don't feel safe in my community? That has to be heard and non-negotiable. I remember growing up in this small community on the east side of Birmingham known as Kingston. And people were coming in and they were talking about all these wonderful things they were going to do for our community. They were going to build this, they were going to redo this, remodel that. And they were just so excited. And I remember after they left, I remember the look on my grandmother's face. And she quietly said, but what if that's not what I need? This is why we have to give community space to hear. Remember, the community is the expert. They have the lived experience, and we have to honor that as expertise. So when we're engaging these communities, we have to make sure that we're listening, because that's the way we lead. Now, the next part of community engagement is to make sure that we recognize the historical mistrust that's happened in these communities, and also the generations of racial inequity. And we know, especially in our Black communities, that these inequities didn't die, they evolved. Today, they show up in disparities with access to food, healthcare outcomes, access to housing, economic stability. These are challenges that our communities are facing every single day. And it also determines who thrives and who struggles. This is why we have to engage these communities with open ears and understanding that, again, they are the expert. Now, when we start to move forward towards programming and implementation, here's where we have to lend voice to the community. They know exactly what they need. So we have to sit down and ask the community, what is it that you need to make your community more effective in the things that you're lacking? It's great that we're honoring some of their deficits, but CBPR is different. We don't harp on the deficits. We focus on the assets in those communities. What are those assets? Only the community members know. Again, we are an outsider coming into their community, so it's our job to listen to them and find out, what are the strengths in your community? There are strong faith institutions in communities that are always honored. There's intergenerational wisdom in these communities. But if we're not taking the time to sit down and listen to these communities instead of labeling them, then we're missing the opportunity to move the needle on equity in these communities. When we talk about programming, it's not a good idea for us researchers coming in with our nice little fancy outfits on to say to a community, I've got a great idea for you guys. How would you like it if someone came into your community and had a great idea to put something in your backyard without consulting you? This is why community-based participatory research is so powerful. It opens the door for authentic conversation and authentic partnership. We are co-authors in the work with the communities. Our job is not to lead them, our job is to follow them. Because when the communities own the work continues even when we leave. When we're doing programming, we have to think about programming that involves language that's culturally competent for our communities. If we do the history and study these communities, often our communities lack educational progress. So we need to make sure that the language matches what we're doing in these communities. Although you have these fancy degrees and we're in these boardrooms, that's not where programming needs to be designed. Programming needs to be designed in the community, not in our boardrooms, not behind a wall, but communities need to lead the charge. This is where we create coalitions within our communities. And these coalitions are charged with meeting and deciding what's going to work best for the community. This is where focus groups are valuable, because these are roundtable discussions that gives every person in that community an opportunity to voice what the community needs. Once we find out what they need, we work hand in hand with these communities to create a community action plan. Notice the word action. That means every community member has a part in moving the community forward. Once we start that, we're now moving towards stability. What's going to be sustainable for this community? And we have to start with ethics. Ethics cannot be a checklist. Ethics has to be a commitment. a commitment that you're going to be here and do the work. You're going to show up with these communities, and you're going to help lead with these communities. I charge you today, use community-based participatory research, not as a project, but a pathway to equity and lasting change. When we approach communities with humility and respect, we don't just change programs, we change outcomes, we change relationships, we change futures, and ultimately, we change what's possible. Thank you.